After years spent in early access, Baldur's Gate 3 is finally available. Baldur's Gate 3 adapts the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rules into video game form, but it forgot the part where the Dungeon Master will fudge dice rolls to stop the party from being killed.
Interesting.
That's right, Baldur's Gate 3 can be a brutally difficult game, especially during its opening hours when your characters suck and you have no magic items to fall back on when you run out of resources. Luckily for the level 1 bards and wizards of the world, we have some tips and tricks to help your character survive the escape from the Mind Flayer ship and go on to become the new big hero of Baldur's Gate. Number 5. Want to play the hero? Make a charisma-based character. Video game developers put a lot of work into their evil routes, only for the vast majority of players to ignore them and play a hero. Larian Studios didn't get that memo, which is why Baldur's Gate 3 lets you play a serial killer or act as the avatar for a psychic tadpole that wants to eat the brains of living creatures. It seems that the devs aren't aware they're dealing with millions of gamers who have tried at some point in their life to follow the rules of the road in Grand Theft Auto and put off their killing spree for as long as possible. Stop! Baldur's Gate 3 is a combat-heavy game, but you can avoid a lot of battles with the charisma stat. There are 3 skills tied to charisma that often appear as dialogue options: deception, which you need for fooling people, intimidation, which is used to scare people, and persuasion, which is used to sway opinions. You can use these skills to make foes stand down or convince them to leave, allowing you to bypass dangerous fights without risk of hurting your party.
In that case...
The optimal way to go about this is to create a character that belongs to a class that heavily uses the charisma skill. Your options are the Bard, which has a lot of buffing and healing spells as well as access to lots of skills, the Paladin, which is a melee fighter with powerful magical attacks, the Sorcerer, an arcane spellcaster who can change how their spells function, and the Warlock, a magic user with few spells but lots of supernatural powers that are given to them by an ungodly entity. If you pick one of these classes, make Charisma your highest stat and pick Deception, Intimidation, and Persuasion for your skill proficiencies at character creation. You now have the tools for evading conflict and avoiding fights. If you also have a character in your party with the Guidance cantrip or the Friends cantrip, they'll make it even easier for you to pass Charisma skill checks and talk your way out of battle, as they can be used to improve your dice rolls. This isn't to say that all situations can be resolved with diplomacy. You can't exactly convince Mr. Skeleton to stop shanking you in the back with his bone axe, but many dangerous encounters in Baldur's Gate 3 can be skipped with a well-timed deception, intimidation, or persuasion check. Number 4. Winning fights with gravity. Most Dungeons & Dragons battles take place on a flat surface. This is because it can be annoying to keep track of height and distance when all you have is a piece of grid paper and a couple of goblin figures to go by. Baldur's Gate 3 is the total opposite of your average D&D game in this regard, as verticality plays a huge role in combat, especially for characters with ranged weapons and spells. In Baldur's Gate 3, attacking from the high ground like Obi-Wan gives you a bonus to attack rolls against opponents who are below you. The opposite is also true, with characters on the low ground suffering a penalty when attacking people above them. Luckily, all of your characters have the jump ability, allowing you to reach areas above you with relative ease. There are also spells and items that let you fly, making it even easier to get into favorable positions. Gravity also plays a huge role in combat. This is thanks to the shove command that all characters have. You can use shove as a bonus action on your turn to make an athletics skill check against an enemy. If you win, then the enemy gets pushed back. There are also spells that can move enemies away, such as Gust of Wind and Thunder Wave. The benefit to pushing enemies off ledges is that they'll take damage from falls. Not only will this let you harm a foe, but you'll potentially push them out of movement range of your party, forcing them to waste a turn catching up. You can use this time to hit them with ranged attacks, potentially killing them before they reach you. There are also some instant kill ledges where an enemy or a party member will die when pushed off. Just be aware that enemies can use these same shoving tactics on you. This means you should avoid ending your turn near a ledge whenever possible, otherwise your party might be getting dropped off ledges like Hans Gruber. Number 3. Examining your way to victory. When playing D&D, you're not supposed to use knowledge of the game mechanics to your advantage. If you pull out a copy of the monster manual during the game and start looking up the stats of a creature you're fighting, the dungeon master is likely to boot you out of their house and never invite you back. This isn't the case with Baldur's Gate 3. The developers give you the tools you need to learn information about enemies that your character shouldn't know. You do this with the help of the Examine command, which can be found in the context menu when clicking on an enemy, or if you're using a controller, hitting down on the D-pad when hovering the cursor over a foe. This will bring up the Examine window, which features a monster's stats, current hit points, level, resistances, weaknesses, immunities, and all of its special abilities. You can use this information to plan your attack, as you can learn what elements to use against the enemy and which debuff spells are most likely to work. This is because pretty much every debuff or status effect spell in Baldur's Gate 3 gives the enemy a saving throw, which is tied to one of the 6 stats. For example, if you know an enemy has low dexterity score, then it is more likely that a cantrip like Sacred Flame will hit them, as it has a dexterity saving throw to avoid damage. If you spot enemies on the map, then make sure to use Examine on all of them. You can use the knowledge it provides to plan your strategy and work out which of your moves will work best against them. This won't guarantee you a victory. Baldur's Gate 3 is still tied to dice rolls, but you can hedge your bets by working out what you want to do ahead of time. Number 2. Bribe shopkeepers with your junk for better prices.
You look like you got something jingling in your pocket.
It's no secret that Baldur's Gate 3 reuses many of the elements of Larian Studios' previous game, Divinity Original Sin 2. One of the most obvious examples of this involves the merchants that appear throughout the land, as they all have an attitude stat which reflects how much they like you. Attitude can go as high as 100 and can fall into negative numbers, determining how much they will buy and sell items from you for. It's possible to influence a merchant's attitude by having a high charisma stat, but there is another way you can get these jerks to like you: bribery. When you talk to a merchant in Baldur's Gate 3, you can bring up a barter menu. If you put items on your side of the screen but ask for nothing in return, then they'll accept the items as gifts, which will increase their attitude score accordingly.
Sylvanas, guide your path.
A smart tactic to take during the early hours of the game is to focus on one merchant, such as Aaron in the Druid's Grove, and shower them with gifts until they have an attitude score of 100. The best way to do this is to give them all of the junk you pick up in Quest. And make no mistake, Baldur's Gate 3 gives you a lot of junk. There are countless empty houses filled with food, utensils, and books just waiting to be taken. When out in the field, make sure you have a character with a high strength stat, usually your main melee fighter, and have them pick up everything you find out in the field. Then return to the merchant and give them all of the junk you find. Once your attitude is maxed, you can then concentrate on buying and selling the things you actually need. Number 1. Win at Baldur's Gate 3 by turning it into slapstick comedy. Another element from Divinity Original Sin 2 that has made its way over to Baldur's Gate 3 is surfaces. There are lots of spells and items that can add an element to a surface, such as throwing a bottle of alchemist fire on the ground, creating an area that burns enemies if they're unlucky enough to be inside. By far the best surfaces are the ones that can inflict the prone status effect. When a character is knocked prone, their turn ends immediately and they have to spend half of their movement on the start of their next turn to get up. There is one early game spell that will be knocking your enemies prone left, right, and center, and it's called Grease. This level 1 spell can be found on lots of scrolls, but you can always keep Gale the Wizard in your party if no one else has it, as it's on his list. The Grease spell has a big area of effect when cast, creating difficult terrain to those trying to move through it and slowing them down considerably. Even better, the Grease also explodes. If a couple of enemies are lying on their backs, you can hit the Grease with any fire attack to cause it to blow up, dealing a ton of damage to those within its radius. This slippery combo can be devastating during the early stages of Baldur's Gate 3, and it's worth keeping some greasy mages in your party just to make the most of this strategy. So there you have it. You now have the tools you need to survive the early hours of Baldur's Gate 3. This is a game where the entire world is out to get you, so you're going to need all of the help you can get to make it in the Forgotten Realms. Baldur's Gate 3 is a game that plays dirty, so don't feel bad about playing dirty in turn and using every resource available to you to win.